So, firstly, thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to address here in this very office. I heard that your colleague Ron Asmus has passed away. Uh, his work is really recognized in Croatia, so we hope that the memories of him will remain permanently. I'm coming from Croatia, a small country that is just 20 years old. That means like a child. My grandmother was born in Baška Voda, small place in the mid-coast of Croatia, and she never moved from this small place, but she changed 7 states. That shows how fragile is this area, and the history of this whole region, especially Croatia, is very difficult one. The last failed country we belonged to was former Yugoslavia, and now there are 7 countries coming from this unfortunate society of nations in the Balkans. Croatia was so-called republic in the frame of former Yugoslavia, and we had constitution that allowed former republics to separate, to decide on their destiny, but unfortunately it was followed by the bloody war. And now I will not turn in the past. I'll try to see in the future. And the future of Croatia, and I hope of the whole region, is European future. Croatia is very near to fulfill this ambition because Croatia is now a member of NATO. And now we are finishing our negotiations, and I hope that we are going to finish till the end of the June or July or very soon. The main policy of Croatia is to enter EU itself, but also to support the other countries in the region to do the same. The precondition for this policy is policy of reconciliation, policy of cooperation, and I'm trying to do my best to promote this type of policy in Croatia and in the region as well. But of course, we have to understand that we have to have in our minds totality of the politics. That means if we want to enter EU, we have to know that there is another side of the coin. This is regional policy, because I can hardly imagine a country from Southeast Europe being member of EU without having good relations and cooperations with neighborhood. The history is not easy and not always supporting this type of policy, but I'm really aware and I'm convinced that European and regional policy for Croatia is two sides of the same coin. Of course, background of this is set of values, and if I may, I'll stress that freedom, liberties, individual liberties, collective liberties, cooperation, peace, social stability, developed economy, those values are basis for this type of policy. Of course, the history is not always supporting this, especially consequences from the war are obstacle for peaceful policy. And especially I would like to address about war crimes, because atrocities that took place in the region were really cruel, and the consequences are very harsh. So the policy is also, the policy I'm trying to promote is based on reconciliation. Secondly, it's really necessary to find what is the destiny of missing persons, because still about 1,900 persons, Croatian citizens of Croatian and Serbian origins, are missing. About 1,000 and something Croats and about 800 Serbs. And now we are in the phase that we don't distinguish Croats and Serbs. We are just trying to find Croatian citizens missing from the war. Then it's necessary to prosecute war crimes. I really agree with this wording, no peace without justice. Because promoting justice, we are promoting also values, we are promoting idea of peace, and this is some kind of warning to politicians and military and the other factors of our societies. War criminals, war crimes should not be basis for any policy. There is also economical basis for the policy Croatia is promoting now, because if we see what is the situation in the region now, all countries, including my country, including Croatia, we have really serious economical difficulties. And it's crucial for us to promote better economical cooperation, trade. We have to act upon third markets, and we have to attach foreign investments. And that's obviously too ambitious for small countries, undeveloped countries. We have to act together. We have to open new possibilities for our region. And I would like to stress that among 6 countries when Croatia exports, we have Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, and Serbia. That means half of countries are from the region. But obviously we have to recognize the problems. We have to recognize open issues with our neighbors, because reality and a realistic approach is necessary. The relations cannot be resolved without resolving specific open issues. If we consider what the open issues with Serbia, of course, we have problem of disappeared persons. We have problem of responsibility for the war crime. We have border problem on River Danube. We have some property problem, not only concerning states, but also concerning enterprises and individuals. We have problem of cultural heritage stolen during the war from Croatia and delivered to Serbia. And also a very sensitive question of proceedings before the ICTY genocide case that's very famous now in all countries. Of course, there is also issue of minorities, and we consider our minorities as a bridge, not as obstacle in building our relations. There is big Serbian minority in Croatia. Unfortunately, it's smaller than before the war. And there is Croatian minority in Serbia. Unfortunately, it's also smaller than before the war. Concerning Croatian arrangements about position of minorities, I have to stress that we have very good legislation. We have legislation that guarantees participation in local government and state government of minorities. We have guaranteed seats in the parliament, and now Serbian political party is part of governing coalition in Croatia. That does not mean that there are no problems. There are problems. Participation in administration is not a proper one. We have problem with those refugees who came back to Croatia. Their especially economical position is not good, unfortunately. That's the situation also with Croats coming from the other parts of Croatia back to Dalmatia, northern Dalmatia, and Slavonia as well. Relations with Serbia are better and better. I have to stress that after first meetings of President Tadić and myself, there are now very intensive cooperation and coordination between governments. We have intergovernmental commissions dealing with different specific problems, all those I mentioned before. And we are also cooperating in prosecuting not only organized crime, but war crimes as well. And that's very important, and it sells a very important message about orientation of our societies. Now we are preparing a donors conference to resolve issue of refugees, trying to help all those people who are willing to come back to Croatia to do this, and to settle those people who are willing to stay in Serbia in proper manner. Speaking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, I have to stress that Bosnia and Herzegovina is probably our most important neighbor, because we have not only the longest border, it's more than 1,000 kilometers, but we have common history. We have a big group of Croats living in Bosnia and Herzegovina is so-called constitutional national group, and also we have Bosniaks as national minority in Croatia. The situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina is complicated. I will not now explain it. It's internal matter of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I have to stress that part of relations between Croatia and Bosnia also determined by the fact that there is a big Croatian group in Bosnia and Herzegovina. With Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have also to resolve border issues on the coast and on the northwest on Bosnia and Herzegovina, or east of Croatia. We have to resolve also refugee question and some other economical issues, property issues, similarly as with Serbia. But let's now consider war crimes. They're very important from emotional point of view, from political point of view, because unfortunately the war that took place in former Yugoslavia was very against international law on armed conflicts, humanitarian law, and that was the reason international reaction was forming International Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. What was the consequence of the war for the Republic of Croatia? I have to stress that 26% of our territory were under occupation. The fights took place on 54% of our territory, involving about 36–40% of our total population. About 23,500 persons were killed, about 15,000 on Croatian side, about more than 8,000 on Serbian side. We had more than 500,000 of refugees, and as I already told, about 1,900 people are still missing. About 25% of Croatian economy was completely destroyed. War damages are about 35 billion of euros, and the war, from military point of view, ended in 95, but really it was completed by integration of eastern part of Croatia in 98. Having in mind historical experiences towards war crimes, there were different solutions. Justice of the winner was not, of course, acceptable because of very specific situation. Truth commissions, like in South Africa, was not also acceptable due to the fact that all countries in the region have developed a legal system and court system. And at the very beginning, even during the war, we had national courts, but there was not political will to prosecute war crimes in appropriate manner. And that was the reason of establishment of the International Court for former Yugoslavia, the ICTY. And in Croatia, this tribunal was very welcomed at the very beginning on the wrong assumption. The wrong assumption was that this court is going to prosecute just the others, not ourselves as well. And if we consider the phases of cooperation with the ICTY, because cooperation is obligation under the Chapter 7 of UN Charter, Then we can recognize that up to 2000 that we had some kind of reluctance to cooperate, and our cooperation, Croatian cooperation, and it was similar with the other countries, especially Serbia, the cooperation was not satisfying. After 2000, all Croatian governments improved cooperation with the ICTY, left government, right government, and of course the present government as well. In several occasions, different prosecutors of the ICTY made different type of announcements and recognitions of the full cooperation of Croatia. From time to time, even in the last period, there were some disputes on so-called artillery files, but it's seen from the history. Those artillery files disappeared before this cooperation started to be full. And now the Croatian government is really fulfilling everything under the statutes of the ICTY. The result of the work of the ICTY is, I will say, important, but I'm not satisfied completely with it. The ICTY indicted 161 persons, and there are 64 sentences. Some of very important indictees are still at large. And I think the ICTY didn't cover all important cases. That's my main objection to its work. Obviously, the ICTY could not prosecute everyone. The capacities are limited, definitely. And the basic idea of the ICTY also has assumption that national courts are going to prosecute war criminals as well. So Croatia started to prosecute war criminals from the very beginning of the war. But unfortunately, the policy of prosecution was not always proper one. At the very beginning, our prosecution was focused to the member of opposite side. And from 2000, namely from 2000, and especially more and more in these days, our prosecution is based on objective criteria, legal criteria, and now we can state that prosecution of war criminals is not based on a nationality of the indictees. I have to tell you some numbers. We started and initiated about 3,600 war crime cases. At the very beginning, most of them, or nearly all of them, were Serbs. Later, there was a revision of the cases because some of them were not always professionally motivated. And at the very end, about 1,800 people were accused. We had guilty verdicts in 560 cases and a not guilty in 720 cases. That's very interesting because in principle, we have, in general terms, we have much more guilty verdicts than acquittals before Croatian courts. We have about 80, even 90% of guilty sentences in general cases, but here we have more acquittals than guilty sentences. That's very important, and that means that our courts are really taking important legal things in consideration, trying to avoid any political influence. So we have about 100 cases, 95 cases in which members of Croatian military and police are accused before our courts for war crimes. That means the policy is changed. Yes, most of indictees are not Croats, but we have also important military members accused before Croatian courts, including generals. We have even case when general was sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment for war crimes. So that shows the willingness of Croatia to prosecute war crimes in the same manner for everyone. What is the most important message from all these war crime issues? Firstly, cooperation with the ICTY and the reaction towards some verdicts are not always positive in Croatian public. From the other side, our citizens much more easily accept verdicts of Croatian courts, in spite who is indicted. The message that war crime is not allowed, and it's not welcomed, even defending your country, is much easier delivered by national courts than international court. Definitely, I think that a role of national courts is very important. Definitely, it's not possible to prosecute in appropriate manner war crimes if we do not have cooperation with our neighboring countries. And the very good example of much better relations between countries is cooperation in the field of criminal matters. Now we have special agreements with Serbia, with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro as well, to help each other in cases of organized crime. It's very important because up to recent period, criminals cooperated much better than the states. And now it's changed. And that's very important for security in the region and in Europe as well, because many important criminal activities, criminal groups, organized criminal groups operated from Southeast Europe, even in Western Europe countries and all around the world. But we have also cooperation in war crime cases. There is special agreement between general public prosecutor in Croatia and the prosecutor for war crimes in Serbia, exchanging data, witnesses, evidences. Even it was very interesting and very productive cooperation in the last case that was very sensitive, so-called Purda case. It happened that one of Croatian soldiers was indicted in Serbia for war crime, but this case was based on evidences obtained by force during his capture. He was captured in one camp in Serbia. And then he was arrested in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the most important outcome of this case was that public prosecutor from Croatia and public prosecutor from Serbia cooperated, and they had consensus that there is no war crime in that case. And Mr. Purda was released. And the basis for this was this policy of cooperation and understanding of each other. That's I think, the best example how cooperation can improve security of people, rule of law, and good relations among states in the region. Now, having in mind what happened in the region, having in mind that war crimes really touched so many families, so many individuals, that those war crimes has a very important influence on politics, on politicians as well. I have to conclude that responsibility for war crimes and fair trials are a really important basis for new policy in the region. If you ask me, do I consider what happened in judiciaries of different countries is something positive, then my answer will be definitely yes. So, and it's very important to stress the influence of the ICTY of this process in the region. In spite, there are people completely unsatisfied with the ICTY. There are some people that are very critical about the ICTY outcome. Some people celebrating the ICTY, or very realistic people understanding that I belong to this group. I'm really in favor of international justice, but criticizing sometimes the ICTY as national courts as well. So I have to stress that the role of the ICTY was very important. Firstly, they really opened this philosophy of responsibility, no impunity. And this philosophy was transferred to national fields. It was not easy to recognize for public in all particular cases that their generals, their military, their politicians can be responsible for war crimes. This philosophy of impunity is over. Secondly, the ICTY influenced on national judiciaries by different criteria, legal criteria. And Croatian, I will speak about Croatian judiciary. Croatian judiciary is not the same as before the ICTY, especially in deciding on war crime matters. I have to witness that in Belgrade there is also quite competent court for war crime tribunal. And the Serbian judiciary is, in my opinion, if I may tell this, is much better than before. There is also influence on legislation. Our criminal codes have been changed, and we introduced criteria, especially on common responsibility, in our national legislation. And finally, the ICTY was some kind of father of the ICC, Universal Court, unfortunately not accepted yet by many countries, unfortunately, including the United States. But I hope in future it will be changed. Our judiciaries also accepted criteria how to prove war crimes, what are the elements, different elements, and especially those elements were involved from the cases before the ICTY. What does it mean, crimes? What is crime against humanity? What are the elements? Definitely our courts accepted this practice from the ICTY. In many cases, they were led before our courts. So the influence of the ICTY is good, very good to our judiciary. But of course, there are some weaknesses, especially if we consider how much money was spent in the ICTY. They spent about $2 billion. It's about 10 million per capita. That means per indictees per case. It's very high cost, very high, and probably this money could be spent better to benefit not only justice but the region as well. Secondly, some criteria applied by the ICTY are not easy to understand from the legal point of view. I mean especially this third type of joint criminal enterprise, which is complicated construction that is moving responsibility from criteria established in the European, not only European, but American as well, common law tradition concerning responsibility. And that's something that caused not only legal problems, but emotional and political as well. This last case, Gotovina case, showed this very good. So definitely in this case, no one is contending that war crimes didn't take place. Yes, there were many war crimes, but what is the responsibility? Who is responsible and under what basis? And I'm very curious, not as politician, not as president, but as law professor, criminal law professor, what will be the final outcome after the appeal. So At the very end, I would like to conclude. I would like to stress that I will continue to promote the policy of reconciliation. In my opinion, no alternative to this policy. Future, I see future, near future, as possibility to all countries in the region to join EU. And I'm completely aware that without addressing responsibility for war crimes, this policy is not possible. Thank you very much.